Book 1, Arrakis. A beginning is the time for taking the most delicate care that the balances are correct. This every internet reviewer knows. To begin your study of the reputation of Dune, then, take care that you first place it in its time. Written in the 45th year of the American author Frank Herbert. And take the most special care that you locate Dune in its genre, science fiction. Do not be deceived by the fact that it has no robots or computers or space. Science fiction, the genre known as literature of ideas, is forever its place. I really don't think I need to explain what Dune is to you. If you found this video, you're either a Frank Herbert superfan currently on your 9th reread, or you just have an unhealthy obsession with Timothee Chalamet's cheekbones. Yes, Grandma, they are pretty amazing. Thank you for watching my videos. Anyway, whatever the case may be, you at least have a general understanding of what Dune is about. Franklin Patrick Herbert Jr. was an American journalist, photographer, and science fiction author who had a bunch of opinions on the state of the world. But instead of shouting at people on Twitter, he wrote the best-selling science fiction book of all time, like the Chad that he was. I don't know about you, but for one book to hold such an impressive title for more than half a century is quite the achievement in my opinion. And now, with the new movie expected to be released sometimes in the next half a century, I thought this would be a good time for me to dive into this titan of literature and see what all the fuss is about. And hopefully, by doing this in-depth analysis on the structure, narrative, and themes of Dune, I might just stumble on some wisdom that will help me in my creative quest to improve my facial hair non-situation. Now, before we get going, I feel like I must warn you that to explain Dune properly, I would probably need a PhD in philosophy, a pinup board, and 15 grams of speed, but for all of you who are here just because of great cheekbones, I'll give my best anyway.
There's a crusade coming.
The base building blocks of the Dune universe are pretty standard, right? Humanity invented faster-than-light travel, spread across the stars, and then spent several thousand years killing each other. Feeling slightly left out, computers tried pulling a Skynet, but luckily humans countered with a John Connor, and now everyone has to show their work. However, banning all calculators also means that now humans have to pilot spaceships at faster-than-light speeds. And while you might think that driving that fast could be considered dangerous, it is in fact perfectly safe on the account of the pilots being perpetually high. Which brings us to the famous spice. The spice melange is the most expensive type of weed in the entire galaxy and can only be harvested at one place, Arrakis. Arrakis, also known as Dune, is a really hot planet infested with kilometer-long sandworms that chill in the desert and like to eat people. And everything is so dry, I'm surprised Ben Shapiro hasn't proposed yet. The spice mined on Arrakis allows for interstellar travel, as I've already said, it extends your lifespan, it makes you resistant to poison, it allows you to see into the future, and experience your great-great-grandmother's orgasms.
There's something happening to me. There's something awakening in my mind, I can't control it.
Talking about old ladies though, there's an ancient order of religious wizards who steal children and indoctrinate them into their No Boys Allowed club. The Bene Gesserit, as they are called, have some pretty cool abilities like being able to choose whether or not they want to be pregnant, they can tell if you're lying, and can make you do whatever they want with nothing but their voice. So in other words, your girlfriend is a Bene Gesserit. For thousands of years, the Bene Gesserit have run a secret breeding program, with the hope of one day combining the right genes to birth the so-called Kwisatz Haderach, a male Bene Gesserit and an all-powerful savior of humanity who will finally unlock the secrets of the universe and venture where no man has gone before, inside the mind of a woman. None of these are jokes, it's all in the book. To prepare humanity for the arrival of the Kiwi headband, the Bene Gesserit had spread various superstitions throughout the galaxy, hoping to create religious prophecies of salvation in a process they call Missionaria Protectiva, and I call Facebook. At the start of Dune, this has all been going on for thousands of years, and now a Bene Gesserit sits next to every ruler of every planet, and they believe they're only one generation away from birthing the Kwisatz Haderach.
Do you often dream things that happen just as you dreamed them?
Yes.
Now, before I read Dune, I was always a little bit confused by the fact that this book is considered to be the staple of science fiction. Sure, everything that happens is out among the stars on an alien planet at the center of a galactic empire with spaceships and laser guns and shields. But magic space seasoning, visions of the future, mind control, how far up your butt does the still suit go? I mean, none of those things are explained very well and are closer to Gandalf's magic than they are to the positronic brain. However, reading Dune, it didn't take long to see why it does belong in science fiction. Yes, Frank departs greatly from traditional sci-fi of his time and doesn't bother explaining almost any of the defining aspects of his world, and leans really heavily into the "a wizard did it" explanation. But he stays true to what I think is the defining aspect of science fiction, and that is a modern understanding of reality. No gods, no superpowers, no magical forces of good and evil locked in an eternal battle. Just the laws of nature as we know them, humanity's insatiable greed, and the constant struggle to convince our moms Obama was a bad president.
You inherit too much power. You have proven you can rule yourself. Now you must learn to rule others.
But however much I like the world building of Dune, I wouldn't be the self-proclaimed unpublished writing guru with no credentials to his name that I am if I could refrain myself from commenting on the presentation. I must say that I spent many days staring at my keyboard in agony because I just couldn't decide whether I love how the world of Dune is presented and am amazed by it, or thoroughly disappointed. So, naturally being a liberal, I decided to adopt both positions simultaneously. On the macro scale, Frank does a masterful job. Even though almost all of the plot happens on one planet, covered 99% with sand, Frank manages to realize an entire galactic empire. And he does it with such beautiful subtlety you unfortunately see so rarely these days. Pausing the story and delivering 3 to 5 pages of exposition just for the benefit of the reader has become such a norm that no one even questions it anymore. Kind of like putting ads on a sponsored video, or saying what a great President Obama was. But Frank offers you no floaters, no hands to hold on to. He trusts you'll be able to figure everything out on your own, and I love it. It really reminds me of how we teach children to swim in Croatia. We shove them in and tell them to flap their arms.
Father rules an entire planet.
He's losing it.
He's getting a richer one.
He'll lose that one too.
You know how sometimes, when you read a really well-written book, you can feel like you are present in every moment, like you can absorb every little detail almost subconsciously, just like you are there with the characters living through the story. Well, Dune is not that. I wrote over 1,000 words on exactly why, with multiple examples and in-depth explanations, but then I remembered I'm the only one who cares. So I'll just say that Frank's descriptions suck, and leave it at that. They are flowery to the point of being distracting, and Frank often gets lost in random metaphors for so long that I forgot what was being described in the first place. For me, the descriptions almost made this book unreadable. Kind of like my jokes make this video unwatchable. Nothing on the page ever connected with me, and I found it really hard to get into individual moments. Take for example the worms. They play such an integral part in the story and are such an original aspect of Dune. They're supposed to be these absolutely gigantic monsters several kilometers long that burrow through the sand at great speeds and devour machines and people and entire armies. But I was never impressed by them or in awe. Frank never managed to make their size a visceral thing, and for me that was a huge disappointment. Because you can claim your worm is 2 kilometers long all you want, but if you can't make me scream, then what's the point?
Arrakis is a death trap.
I must not be indifferent. Apathy is the interest killer. Apathy is the little death that brings DNF wrap-ups. So Dune follows a lord, Duke Leto Atreides, his baby mama Jessica, and their teenage son Paul. They are commanded by the Emperor to leave their comfy home and go rule Arrakis, the center of the Empire, which has until now been ruled by the Harkonnens, the Duke's enemies with questionable fetishes. Except in this one, the Emperor is also evil. Duke Leto is of course widely known as an honorable and just leader who cares about his men. Lady Jessica is a Bene Gesserit who should have given birth to the mother of the kawaii hamster, but instead she decided to give Leto a son because she loved him so much. And totally not because she wanted to be the mother of the Quartz headmaster. That means that their son Paul is the cumulative result of thousands of years of selective breeding of the greatest, smartest, and most handsome humanity had to offer, hence the cheekbones.
Fear is the mind killer.
My Lord Duke.
Where the fear is gone, only I will remain.
Compared to its relative popularity and status as inspiration for 50% of today's pop culture, I would say very few people have actually read Dune. Apologists will say that it's just not for everyone, but really, it's just the characters. Sorry, I was just trying one more time to think of one positive thing to say. I guess I kind of liked how the only emotions I got from Paul were melancholy and detest for everyone and everything else, which did personally make him very relatable, but you must remember, there's a reason why I have no friends. I was literally presented with my ultimate wish fulfillment of a genetically superior teenager conquering the known galaxy, and all I could think about was what a bad President Obama was. I just couldn't get invested and didn't care about any of these people. There is a scene early in the book where Leto leaves the room after a conversation with Paul, and Paul reflects on how the space was empty even before his father departed. And while I'm not sure how a Jughead Jones line from the CW's Riverdale ended up in Dune, it does perfectly describe my feelings towards all these characters. They came into my life while I was reading the book, and now they're gone, but the space was empty even before I put the book down. Which is quite a shame, because in theory these sound like interesting characters. It's just that none of their potential was ever realized on the page. And here again, I would say Frank's writing is the main culprit. Dune is told in third-person omniscient. Basically, a floating mind-reading head is describing all the scenes and telling us what is happening and what each of the characters present is thinking and feeling in a very concise and direct fashion. I assume we all know about the first and second rule of the YouTube writing advice channels. Number 1, show don't tell, and number 2, buy my book. Oh, and something about filter words. For those of you who aren't familiar with writer slang, show don't tell means describe the feeling of an emotion rather than just stating the emotion. For example, instead of saying Baron Harkonnen was horny, say Baron Harkonnen quickened his step and licked his lips at the thought of the little boy tied in his bedroom. And filter words are words like saw, felt, thought, that create a filter between the reader and character. Using these words subconsciously reminds the reader it is not them experiencing the story, and therefore lowers the immersion. That's the theory at least. Now, I understand that there was no YouTube in 1965, so poor Frank probably wasn't even aware he was breaking the most important rules. Okay, to be completely serious for a moment, I'll be the first to say that these rules are not binding, or any writing rules for that matter, and that Frank isn't a bad writer because terrible writing advice said so. However, there is a reason why these rules are being repeated over and over and over again. Writing popular fiction is not just about delivering information to the readers, it should also be about engaging them emotionally, and Frank is just too clean and clinical for my tastes. Take a flashlight, for example. The light is bright and very focused. Good for going to the toilet without waking your significant other, for example. But try having a romantic dinner with 3 flashlights on the table, and soon you'll be needing a 4th. If you know what I mean.
This is an extermination. They're picking my family off one by one.
If I praise it, they will call me an intellectual. If I criticize it, they will call me a revolutionary. Very early in the story, the Honorable Duke Leto, who for some reason isn't played by Sean Bean in the new movie, gets himself Sean Bean by the Harkonnens. So, Paul and his mother have to flee into the desert, where they join the Freemen. The Freemen, or Fremen if I would be so inclined as to admit I read an 800-page book without once noticing there's only one either. So, the Freemen are the local desert people who spent too much time hanging out with Bear Grylls and now wear special suits that allow them to drink their own armpit sweat. And because of the harsh environment they live in, they have become incredibly badass at fighting, stealth, and sassy one-liners. Upon meeting them, Paul immediately exploits their religion, which they were brainwashed into by the Bene Gesserit a long time ago, to quickly become their leader. He plans to use the Freeman army to enact revenge against the Harkonnens and the Emperor. Except he can see into the future and knows that if he isn't careful, the Freemen will take their jihad out towards the stars, and he mustn't allow that to happen. But not really. The Emperor conveniently comes to Arrakis to spank Paul for being a naughty boy, but instead gets spanked himself and loses both his crown and his daughter. Paul becomes Emperor by threatening to destroy all of the spice, the Harkonnens are killed by Paul's magic sister, and the Freemen are given control of Arrakis, and everyone lived happily ever after. Well, Paul dead, the galaxy burned in a space jihad he unleashed. Oh well, the end.
Let's fight like demons.
An animal caught in a trap will gnaw off its own leg to escape. What will you do?
When talking about Dune, the phrase you will most often hear is "read it for the ideas." Dune might not be written in the most immersive way or have the most compelling characters, but the ideas presented in Dune are like nothing else you've ever seen. Excuse me, but I thought that Dune is about a group of desert people who have their home and resources stolen by more powerful foreigners and are now forced to justly fight for their home with guerrilla tactics and terrorist attacks led by a glorious leader who was wronged by a cruel and greedy emperor and a morbidly obese nonce. Yes, exactly. So, are you saying that Dune is about the imperialistic decadence and stagnation of Western society that deserves to burn under the righteous rage of the Islamic suicide bomber? I mean, based, but also yikes.
The test is simple. Remove your hand from the box, and you die.
What's in the box?
Pain.
We must consider that Dune was written in 1965, quite some time before context got banned on Twitter. So, I think it is only fair we provide some. And hopefully, once we do, you'll see why, to me, Dune is a brilliant exposé on the hypocrisy of the absolutistic morality of modern popular fiction. I swear I know what all those words mean. A large majority of popular fiction, both in Frank's time and today, can basically be boiled down to morally righteous underdog versus superior corrupt entity of some sort. Okay, I'm not here to tell you how the Empire did nothing wrong and Luke is a terrorist, even though they didn't and he is. I just want to point out the difference of how most stories cheer what are technically acts of terrorism, while in Dune, Frank purposefully tries his best to make no moral distinction between the protagonists and antagonists. Morbidly obese nonce aside. While usually the murder of several thousands of people will get our hero a golden medal and thunderous applause, by the end of Dune, you should be filled with dread over what Paul will do next. In fiction, we became hardwired to look at any underdog as the good guy, likable has become synonymous to righteous, and just is a word we use for moral. And Paul's enemies are certainly more powerful than he is. He uses his words just as well as his sword, and after all, he's just a boy seeking justice for a murdered father. But Frank does not make him a hero. Morality and justice are two completely different things that should not be conflated lightly. And that is what Dune is about for me. And we need not look any further than Duke Leto Atreides to know that this is what Frank was trying to tell us. Here is a man who values the life of his people above everything else, and puts his life and the lives of his family in danger because he's honor-bound to do so. He's as close to a good guy you can come to in Dune. And by the end of the book, his son becomes a theocratic despot who manipulates people and their religion for personal gain and sends thousands to kill millions in his name and considers it not the worst route humanity could have taken. A man who finds out his son was killed and simply says, "There will be more."
I know you.
One day, the legend will be born. All of civilization depends on it.
Dune is full of typical fiction tropes like Chosen One, Evil Empire, unpronounceable names, etc., but it doesn't celebrate any of those things. In a way, Frank mocks them. I would say Dune is an incredibly sardonic book, which is a word I learned while reading it. Take for example Frank's cynical view on religion here, and how it is so different from anything you will find anywhere else. In popular fiction, no one dares touch the notion that religion is something intensely personal and the right of every individual. But Frank turns that idea completely on its head and presents it as a predatory science of manipulation. And something about that rings so true to me, and I think it is because it is fundamentally so close to reality. So many fanatic leaders, both throughout history and today, rely on the combination of ignorance and human proclivity towards adoration and deification of individuals. And Dune shows how people can cling to dangerous ideas, clearly coined by madmen, because they're blinded to reality by the false notions of divinity. Amen. Everyone can see, well, most people can see, that the guy who looks you in the eye while he grabs you by the pussy is not the good guy. What Frank tried to do was lift the veil from the guy who makes finger guns at your 5-year-old son dressed in a Spider-Man costume in front of the cameras, and then orders 100 children killed by a drone strike behind the cameras. That's the last dig at Obama, I promise. But because he was the first black American president and he could make a good speech, history will treat him a lot kinder than if he were white, let alone orange. And I'm not trying to make some sort of overt political message here. I just think he's the best modern real-life example of what Frank wanted to point out with Dune. It's not like the President of the United States of America will ever create such a cult personality around himself that he can, I don't know, demand people storm the Capitol building, for example, in an attempt to overthrow democracy, because they believe he was sent here by God to get rid of all the nonsense in Hollywood. I mean, those kind of things just don't happen. But this is what we do. We like to prescribe to people we like, or choose to follow, divine qualities. The founding fathers are still brought up in arguments as arbiters of morality, like they were more than just a bunch of guys who didn't want to pay taxes. And every country is the same. The first Croatian president was factually a war criminal and a would-be dictator. But if you dare say anything but the utmost praise for him, you have made yourself unelectable for life. Like saying, hey, maybe they could have figured out that slavery was bad, when founding the freest country in the world. Or maybe starting a war for independence so you could be the dictator isn't the best motivation. And now, want to piss absolutely everyone off, maybe, just because Daniel Keemstar said something in a loud voice, that doesn't mean you should actually care about it. And I'm no different. For Elon Musk, I would walk off the edge of the earth without a second thought if he killed 1,000 puppies right in front of me. I guess the only thing I'm trying to say here is that it's always good to remember that, in reality, everyone is just as shit as yourself, but some are just better at hiding it. And to go back to Dune, this is just the tip of the iceberg, the proverbial first layer of the proverbial onion that is Dune, if you will. If anything about it is truly amazing, it is the scope. I have never seen an author jam-pack so many metaphors into one world as Frank has managed to do. He touches everything, from common things like greed, hubris, and the decay of government, to more obscure stuff like abuse of technology, manipulation of knowledge, and the power of being in control of your emotions, all the way to the most taboo of topics of all, like people's relationship with religion and Facebook memes. And I could talk for hours about the brilliance of the spice metaphor for single commodity economy, and how, while Frank was inspired by oil, this can so easily be applied to something like Google today. What would we give to someone with the power to delete Google?
All of civilization depends on it.
The one criticism I will pin on Dune is that it's pretty vague, and it relies too much on its sequels to deliver the message. I don't know if you could tell, but my opinions align perfectly with what I put forward as the ones Frank intended with Dune. Basically, when I will be running for President of the Moon in 2064, I will be able to just point to this video and say, this is what I believe in. Organized religion bad, greed bad, humans bad, I'm the conqueror that will bring righteous justice to the world in a holy inferno. And I do think that my interpretation of Dune is correct, and Paul's descent from the son of an honorable man into a tyrant is definitely there. But only when looking at Dune with the context of Dune Messiah and Children of Dune does Frank's condemnation of Paul become undeniable, while Dune in a vacuum could very easily have you conclude that Frank wrote it because he wanted you to join ISIS. And the problem with interpretations is that you would also be correct, thanks to the death of the author, both figuratively and literally in this case. Because if you write a story against people worship and mass genocide in a way that can lead people to believe you're actually advocating for people worship and mass genocide, maybe you haven't made your point quite as clear as you should have.
The future. I can see it. I must not fear. fear is the mind killer.
The power to review a thing is the absolute control over it. The world setting and characters of Dune all have a very modern feel to them, probably because Dune was the inspiration for so much of our popular entertainment today. But unfortunately, the book itself still suffers from problems most old books do. It is paced very differently from a modern day book, which many people just aren't used to and which many others would simply classify as bad. But even more importantly to me, there is much less of a focus on the emotional state and development of characters. And while I am aware that emotions were invented by Pixar on the 19th of November 1995, the fact still remains that I was born after that, and therefore am a slave to my feelings. And if I don't cry at least 17 times while reading a book, I just can't enjoy it. Dune is a book that demands your full focus and concentration, but sadly, to paraphrase Tywin Lannister, never manages to command it. There were several times where I found myself so bored and uninvested that I just stopped reading and went to do something else. And you can blame that on the fruit-fly attention spans of my generation, and you're entitled to your own opinion and I respect it, but for me, if a book does not necessitate the turning of the page, even though it is 3:30 in the morning and I have to be up in 4 hours for an exam I didn't study for, why should I even bother reading it? I found the writing of the script for this video infinitely more enjoyable than actually reading Dune, because I love the concepts and the conclusions Frank offers us, which really make the 60-year-old nerd in me want to give it 10 stars. But I just cannot silence the 14-year-old girl in me that keeps screaming 1 star. So in a highly self-serving attempt to avoid conflict, Dune gets a reader rating of 11 out of 15. However, the aspiring J.K. Rowling inside me found reading Dune an immensely enjoyable experience. And not because it boosted my ego, because it gave me an opportunity to criticize one of the most critically acclaimed best-selling authors of the 20th century, but because it boosted my ego by confirming all of the already pre-existing ideas regarding worldbuilding, what constitutes as good subversion of expectations, and the importance of actually putting a message into your work of popular fiction. And because of that, Dune gets a writer rating of Inspiration Factory. The last thing I will say is that I'm really excited for the movie, because I really think they can successfully bring Dune into the 21st century. I hope they can connect us with the characters a bit more, and of course as the movie is a visual medium, we'll finally be able to experience Arrakis in all its modern CGI glory, which I can't wait for, because I didn't even realize how criminal my inability to imagine anything in this book was until I watched the trailer. And finally, I hope they will emphasize Paul's fall more than the book does, to really nail the point home that Dune is a tragic villain backstory and not a space adventure about a badass teenage boy who conquered the entire galaxy before I ever got laid. I don't know, just a thought. Oh, and Grandma, you asked me whether you should read the book. Well, I usually don't like to give people advice on what they might or might not like, but I will say that I know that you usually read or watch stuff just for fun, and that you like stuff with more characterization and emotion, and that you don't usually care about the political state of the Galactic Empire. So honestly, I'd probably skip the book and just wait for the movie. Hopefully you live that long. Because really there's nothing in the book that can compete with those cheekbones. I mean, who am I kidding? They're fucking amazing.